Emily Carter had always been known for her charm and efficiency at work. At 32, she was a rising star in the marketing department of Sterling & Co., a prestigious firm in downtown Chicago. Originally from a small town in Ohio, she had moved to the city with dreams of a fast-paced career and a glamorous lifestyle. Her sharp mind and captivating presence had quickly made her one of the firm's top performers. Her husband, Mark Carter, was 35 and had an entirely different demeanor. Born and raised in Chicago, he had met Emily during college. Mark was a quiet, reserved individual who worked as a software developer. He preferred a simple life, finding solace in his work and the stability of their suburban home. Despite his introverted nature, Mark had always been fiercely devoted to Emily. They had been married for 7 years, and he had never suspected that their seemingly solid relationship was built on deceit. Emily's boss, Richard Langford, was a 45-year-old senior executive with a reputation for being both influential and unpredictable. Known for his charisma and ruthlessness, Richard had risen through the ranks by leveraging his connections and striking fear into his competitors. His affairs and scandals were the stuff of office gossip, but Emily had never imagined she would become part of his controversial life. It was a Monday morning like any other. The sun streamed through the large windows of the Sterling & Co. office, casting a warm glow on the bustling workspace. Emily had been working tirelessly on a crucial marketing campaign for weeks, and today was meant to be a day of finalizing details. As she reviewed her presentation slides, she was confident that the campaign would be a game-changer for the company. Suddenly, the serenity of the office was shattered. The door to the conference room flew open with a loud crash, drawing the attention of everyone present. The entire room went silent as a woman stormed in. She was in her mid-30s, with fiery red hair and a look of unrestrained fury on her face. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she recognized her as Sarah, a well-known figure in the city's social circles, often mentioned in connection with Richard Langford. Sarah's eyes locked onto Emily with a dangerous glint. Without a word, she grabbed Emily by the hair, yanking her out of her chair. The sudden pain made Emily gasp as she was pulled roughly across the room. Her colleagues watched in stunned silence, unable to process the unfolding chaos. "What is happening?" Emily thought, her mind racing as she tried to free herself from Sarah's iron grip. The office was filled with a mix of gasps, murmurs, and the clatter of falling objects. Sarah dragged Emily through the open-plan office, and it soon became apparent that the commotion was not just a personal vendetta. As Sarah hauled Emily to the center of the office, she began scattering hundreds of photographs. The photos flew through the air, landing on desks, floors, and chairs. Emily's face turned pale as she recognized the images, intimate and explicit photographs of herself with Richard Langford. The once distant rumors of Richard's affairs suddenly became an undeniable reality. Emily's gaze shifted to the entrance of the office, where Mark stood. His face was a mixture of anger and sorrow, his eyes cold and determined. He was holding a stack of papers, divorce papers, and an eviction notice. The sight of him filled Emily with a sense of dread and disbelief. Mark had always been the forgiving type, but today he seemed to be a man transformed. "Mark," Emily managed to say, her voice trembling. "What is this?" Mark's expression remained unchanged. He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto hers with a steely resolve. "I have seen enough," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm done with the lies and deceit." The office was now a scene of pandemonium. Emily's colleagues, who had initially been mere spectators, began to murmur amongst themselves. Some looked on with pity, while others seemed to take a grim satisfaction in the unfolding drama. "I have booked a motel for you," Mark continued, his voice steady. "Enjoy it one last time before you're out on the streets." The words felt like a physical blow to Emily. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process the enormity of Mark's decision. The divorce papers in Mark's hand were a stark reminder of how deeply she had betrayed him. The eviction notice added a new layer of humiliation, signaling the end of her comfortable life. As Emily stood in the center of the office, surrounded by the incriminating evidence of her betrayal, she could feel the weight of her actions pressing down on her. The once familiar office now felt alien and hostile. The faces of her colleagues seemed to blur as she struggled to come to terms with the fact that her life was unraveling before her eyes. As Emily staggered away from the epicenter of the chaos, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She clutched her coat tightly around her as if it could shield her from the judgmental stares of her colleagues. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions: guilt, anger, fear, and a profound sense of loss. The walls of Sterling & Co., once a symbol of her professional success, now seemed to close in on her like a prison. Her first instinct was to flee, to escape the clamor of the office and the weight of her disgrace. She rushed to her desk, where she hastily gathered her personal belongings: her favorite pen, a framed photo of her and Mark from happier times, and a few mementos that had once brought her comfort. The photographs of her and Richard were scattered around, their lurid details taunting her with the memory of her betrayal. Emily's fingers trembled as she stuffed her things into her bag. Each item she packed seemed to carry a reminder of her former life and the shattered trust she had once enjoyed. Her colleagues, who had initially been stunned into silence, began to murmur amongst themselves, their voices rising in a cacophony of judgment and curiosity. Emily could feel their eyes on her, their whispers like daggers slicing through her already bruised pride. The office, a place that had once been a hive of productivity and ambition, had transformed into a theater of humiliation. Emily's coworkers, who had once admired her professional acumen, now looked at her with a mixture of pity and scorn. She avoided eye contact, her face flushed with embarrassment as she made her way to the exit. Mark's words echoed in her mind as she walked through the office doors for the last time. "Enjoy it one last time before you're out on the streets." The finality of his statement was a bitter pill to swallow. Emily had always seen Mark as her rock, the steady anchor in her turbulent life. To realize that he had not only uncovered her deceit but also taken such drastic measures was almost more than she could bear. As she stepped out into the crisp Chicago air, Emily was struck by the stark contrast between the world outside and the chaos she had left behind. The city seemed indifferent to her plight, its bustling streets and towering skyscrapers a far cry from the intimate drama that had unfolded within the walls of Sterling & Co. She hailed a cab, her movements mechanical, and stared out of the window as the cityscape blurred past. The ride to the motel was a quiet one, with the driver casting occasional curious glances in the rearview mirror. Emily's thoughts were a tangled mess of regret and despair. She replayed the events of the morning over and over, trying to understand how everything had spiraled so quickly out of control. The reality of her situation was inescapable. She had betrayed her husband, lost her job, and now faced the prospect of homelessness. When the cab finally arrived at the motel, Emily took a deep breath before stepping out. The neon sign flickered above the entrance, casting an unwelcoming glow on the dingy exterior. The motel was a far cry from the elegant apartment she had shared with Mark. It was a grim reminder of how far she had fallen from the life she once knew. The clerk at the front desk eyed her with a mix of curiosity and suspicion as she checked in. Emily handed over her ID and the small amount of cash she had left, trying to ignore the clerk's scrutinizing gaze. The key to her room felt heavy in her hand, a symbol of the crushing weight of her current predicament. The room was exactly what she had expected: small, worn, and uninviting. The walls were stained, and the furniture looked like it had seen better days. Emily dropped her bag on the bed and sank down beside it, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. The room, with its oppressive atmosphere, seemed to close in on her, amplifying her feelings of isolation and despair. She pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before calling Mark. The call went straight to voicemail, and Emily left a message filled with heartfelt apologies and a plea for forgiveness. She knew it was unlikely that Mark would change his mind, but she had to try. The silence that followed was deafening, and Emily was left alone with her thoughts and the hum of the motel's air conditioner. As the day wore on, Emily tried to distract herself by cleaning up the room and organizing her belongings. She wanted to feel like she was doing something productive, but the task felt meaningless in the face of her overwhelming situation. She took a shower, hoping that the hot water would wash away some of the grime of the day, but it did little to alleviate the emotional burden she carried. By evening, the motel room was a small sanctuary from the outside world, but it was also a stark reminder of the life she had lost. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the muted TV screen as it played a late-night talk show. The laughter and chatter from the television seemed distant and hollow, a cruel contrast to the reality of her situation. As she lay down to sleep, the motel room's thin walls offered little protection from the sounds of the outside world. The noise from the street and the occasional muffled voices from neighboring rooms filled the air. Emily's thoughts drifted to her future, which seemed uncertain and bleak. The path to redemption and recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but for now all she could do was try to come to terms with the magnitude of her choices and their consequences. Emily woke up the next morning to the harsh light of day piercing through the thin curtains of her motel room. The previous day had been a blur of humiliation and despair, and as she rubbed the sleep from her eyes, the weight of her situation settled heavily upon her shoulders. The room was as dreary as ever, with its worn carpet and flickering fluorescent light, but it had become her temporary refuge, a small, grim sanctuary from the chaos she had left behind. The motel's morning atmosphere was far from comforting. The breakfast served at the small, dimly lit lounge was a far cry from the elaborate spreads she was used to. Emily picked at a dry pastry and sipped a cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to muster the energy to face the day. Her mind was clouded with a fog of regret and uncertainty. The events of the previous day replayed in her head like a relentless film reel, each scene more painful than the last. Her phone buzzed with a text message, jolting her from her thoughts. It was from an old colleague, Jenny, who had been with her at Sterling & Co. "I'm so sorry to hear about everything. If you need to talk, I'm here." The message read. Emily stared at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was tempting to reach out for support, but she hesitated, unsure of how to explain her situation without revealing too much. She decided to ignore the message for now, instead focusing on the immediate tasks at hand. Her first priority was to find somewhere permanent to live. The eviction notice from Mark loomed over her like a dark cloud, and the thought of being homeless was both terrifying and demoralizing. With her limited resources, she knew she needed to act quickly. Emily spent the morning scouring online listings for affordable apartments. The task was daunting, her budget was tight, and finding a suitable place in Chicago was proving to be a challenge. The process of filling out rental applications and dealing with potential landlords felt overwhelming. She was acutely aware of how her current predicament would likely impact her chances of securing a new place. Despite her anxiety, Emily forced herself to keep moving. She knew that action, however small, was better than succumbing to her despair. She made a list of affordable apartments in less desirable neighborhoods and began making calls. Each conversation felt like a new hurdle to overcome. The responses she received were often cold and dismissive, and her efforts seemed to be met with more rejection than hope. By late afternoon, Emily decided to take a break from her apartment search. The constant rejections were taking a toll on her already fragile state of mind. She wandered around the neighborhood, trying to distract herself from the mounting stress. The area around the motel was unremarkable, typical of low-rent districts, with fast food joints, discount stores, and a constant hum of traffic. It was a far cry from the vibrant life she had enjoyed before. As she walked, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her past. The memories of her former life at Sterling & Co. seemed both distant and painfully immediate. She had once been at the forefront of major projects, her name synonymous with success and innovation. Now, she was reduced to wandering the streets of a neighborhood she barely recognized, a symbol of her own failure. Her thoughts turned to Mark. The divorce papers and eviction notice were a stark reminder of his final decision. Emily had always known Mark as a man of reason and patience, but his reaction had been anything but. The depth of his hurt and anger had manifested in actions she never would have anticipated. The man who had once been her partner and confidant had become an implacable force of judgment and retribution. That evening, Emily returned to her motel room, feeling drained. The weight of her situation seemed to press down on her from all sides. The room was still as unwelcoming as ever, but it was a small haven from the uncertainties outside. She took a long, hot shower, hoping to wash away the weariness that clung to her. The water did little to alleviate her sense of helplessness, but it provided a brief moment of solace. With no immediate plans, Emily decided to spend some time trying to reconnect with her old friends and colleagues. She drafted an email to Jenny, explaining a bit about her situation without going into too much detail. She'd also reached out to a few other friends, hoping to find some support or advice. The responses were mixed. Some were sympathetic but vague, while others were more forthright in their concern. As the days went by, Emily's search for a new place became increasingly urgent. She visited several potential apartments, each one a reflection of her diminished circumstances. The units were often small, outdated, and located in less desirable areas. Yet Emily tried to remain optimistic, clinging to the hope that she would find something suitable. The process of applying for jobs also began to weigh heavily on her. With her recent scandal making headlines, she found that her options were limited. The job market was unforgiving, and many companies were hesitant to consider someone with such a controversial reputation. The realization that her professional credibility had been tainted was a crushing blow. One afternoon, Emily sat in a small, rundown cafe near the motel, trying to draft a cover letter for a job application. The cafe was a far cry from the upscale establishments she had frequented in the past, but it offered a temporary respite from the monotony of the motel. As she sipped her coffee and typed on her laptop, she felt a sense of determination begin to build within her. Despite the overwhelming odds, Emily knew she had to persevere. The path to rebuilding her life would be arduous, but she was resolved to face it head-on. Her betrayal had caused irreparable damage, but she had to find a way to move forward, to reclaim some semblance of stability and self-respect. As she finished her application and prepared to leave the cafe, Emily noticed a young woman sitting at a nearby table, engrossed in a book. The woman's calm demeanor and focused expression served as a reminder that, despite her own turmoil, life continued for others. Emily felt a pang of envy for the simplicity of the woman's existence, but she also saw it as a symbol of the ordinary lives that went on, unaffected by scandal and drama. Returning to the motel, Emily resolved to continue her search for an apartment and a job. The days were long and the nights even longer, filled with restless thoughts and fleeting moments of hope. Each small victory, a promising lead on an apartment, a potential job interview, became a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden hue on the horizon, Emily sat by the window of her motel room, reflecting on her journey. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to confront it with resilience. Her past had been marred by mistakes, but the future was still unwritten. With every challenge she faced, Emily vowed to rebuild her life, one step at a time, until she could find her way back to a place of stability and self-worth. The weeks following Emily's dramatic fall from grace were filled with a relentless struggle against the mounting odds stacked against her. Each day in the dingy motel was a reminder of her tarnished reputation and broken life. The task of rebuilding seemed insurmountable, but Emily was determined to find her way out of the mire of despair. The motel, though grim, had become Emily's temporary refuge, a place where she could begin to piece her life back together. She had managed to secure a small but more permanent apartment in a rundown part of the city. It was a far cry from the luxury she had once enjoyed, but it was hers, and it represented a new beginning. The apartment was modest, just a single room with peeling wallpaper and a worn-out carpet, but it was a step towards reclaiming her independence. The process of moving in was physically exhausting and emotionally draining. Emily spent long hours packing her belongings from the motel and transporting them to her new place. The process of unpacking was no easier, as each item she sorted through seemed to carry a heavy burden of memories and regrets. Her small apartment quickly became a reflection of her struggle, filled with half-unpacked boxes and a sense of disarray. Emily's job search continued to be a challenge. With her name appearing in scandalous headlines and her professional reputation in tatters, securing employment proved difficult. She faced numerous rejections and was often met with silence after interviews. Her days were consumed with searching for job openings, drafting cover letters, and attending interviews that rarely led to offers. In the midst of her job hunt, Emily found herself reconnecting with her former colleagues and friends. She reached out to Jenny, who had been kind enough to offer her support during the darkest days. Jenny introduced Emily to a networking group for professionals in transition. The group, though modest in size, provided Emily with a glimmer of hope. It was a place where she could share her experiences and receive advice from others who had faced similar challenges. One evening, after a particularly disheartening day of job hunting, Emily attended one of the networking group's meetings. The atmosphere was supportive and encouraging, a stark contrast to the cold indifference she had faced elsewhere. She spoke candidly about her situation, her voice trembling as she recounted the events that had led to her downfall. To her surprise, the members of the group were empathetic and understanding. They offered practical advice and emotional support, and some even extended offers to review her resume and provide references. Emily felt a renewed sense of determination and purpose. It was clear that while her past mistakes had cast a long shadow, there were still people willing to help her build a new future. In the weeks that followed, Emily made significant strides in her job search. With the help of her new network, she secured a position as a junior marketing analyst at a small but growing firm. The job was a far cry from the high-profile role she had once held, but it was a start. The work was challenging, and the pay was modest, but it provided Emily with a sense of stability and a chance to prove herself once again. Her new colleagues were supportive and appreciative of her efforts. Emily worked diligently, putting her skills and experience to good use. Slowly, she began to rebuild her professional reputation, one project at a time. The satisfaction of completing each task and receiving positive feedback from her new team helped to restore her confidence. As Emily settled into her new role, she also began to address the personal aspects of her life that had been neglected. The apartment, once a symbol of her downfall, started to feel like a home. She decorated it with care, adding personal touches that made the space feel inviting and comfortable. The process of transforming the apartment from a bleak shell into a warm and welcoming space was therapeutic, giving her a renewed sense of control over her environment. One of the most significant aspects of Emily's journey was her ongoing effort to reconcile with Mark. Despite her attempts to reach out and seek forgiveness, Mark remained distant and unresponsive. The pain of their broken marriage was still fresh, and Emily understood that rebuilding their relationship was a distant hope rather than an immediate possibility. Emily dedicated herself to self-improvement, seeking therapy to address the emotional and psychological scars left by her betrayal and the fallout that followed. The therapy sessions provided her with tools to cope with her emotions, to understand the root causes of her actions, and to develop healthier patterns of behavior. It was a long and arduous process, but one that Emily embraced wholeheartedly. The holidays approached, and with them, the opportunity for reflection and renewal. Emily decided to spend Christmas volunteering at a local shelter, hoping to give back to the community that had offered her so much support. The experience was humbling and fulfilling. As she served meals and shared moments of kindness with those less fortunate, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. During one of her volunteer shifts, Emily encountered a young woman named Rachel who was facing challenges similar to her own. Rachel's story resonated deeply with Emily, and they struck up a conversation that lasted for hours. Rachel's resilience and determination inspired Emily, and their newfound friendship became a source of mutual support and encouragement. As the year drew to a close, Emily took stock of her journey. She had faced immense challenges and endured a great deal of suffering, but she had also made significant progress. Her new job was stable, her personal life was beginning to heal, and she had built a network of supportive friends. The path to redemption was far from over, but Emily was now navigating it with renewed hope and determination. On New Year's Eve, Emily sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the year that had passed. The apartment was modest but filled with warmth and light. She had prepared a simple meal for herself and set up a small celebration with candles and a glass of wine. As she gazed out the window at the city lights, she felt a sense of peace and optimism. Emily knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to face it with courage and resilience. The scars of her past would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had learned from her mistakes, grown stronger, and found a renewed sense of purpose. As the clock struck midnight and the new year began, Emily made a silent promise to herself to continue striving for personal growth, to remain resilient in the face of adversity, and to build a future grounded in honesty and integrity. The road to redemption was long and uncertain, but Emily was prepared to walk it with hope in her heart and a commitment to forging a better life for herself.